The worst part wasn't that Julia forgot my birthday. It was watching her post Instagram stories from Romano's rooftop bar while I sat at home with leftover Chinese takeout and a beer that had gone warm an hour ago. My name's Nick Foster, and I'm 40 years old as of today. Not that anyone seemed to care. I run a successful IT consulting firm, make decent money, and somehow managed to marry a woman who treats anniversaries like optional calendar events. Julia works in HR at Meridian Corp, which means she's professionally trained to remember important dates. Just not mine, apparently. I scrolled through her Instagram feed, watching her pose with her usual crew of enablers. There was Heather, the gossipy blonde, who always looked at me like I was something stuck to her shoe. Tessa, the brunette who giggled at everything and had the depth of a puddle. And there, right in the center of the group, was Alex Vance, Julia's boss and the owner of that shiny silver Porsche they were all admiring in the background. Alex was everything I wasn't. Tall, where I was average height, perfectly groomed, where I was perpetually rumpled, and rich enough to buy cars that cost more than most people's houses. The guy had that smug confidence that comes from never being told no, never having to work for anything that mattered. My phone buzzed. A text from Julia. Having drinks with the girls, don't wait up. The girls, right. Because Alex Vance was definitely one of the girls. I'd been suspicious for months. The late nights at the office, the new clothes, the way she'd started going to the gym religiously and buying expensive perfume. Classic signs that any IT guy worth his salt would recognize as suspicious user behavior. But tonight, on my birthday, watching her laugh and pose next to Alex's Porsche while I sat alone in our living room, something crystallized in my mind. A plan started forming, the kind of methodical, step-by-step approach I used to debug complex systems. If Julia wanted to play games, I'd show her what happened when you messed with someone who made a living solving problems. My phone rang. Julia's ringtone. Nick, we need to talk. Family meeting, now. Her voice had that sharp edge it got when she was trying to flip a situation to make herself the victim. Now? It's almost midnight. I'm coming home. This can't wait. She hung up before I could respond. I looked around our living room. The birthday cards I'd bought myself and left unopened on the coffee table, the small cake I'd picked up from the grocery store, still in its plastic container. Nothing says happy birthday like celebrating alone while your wife parties with her boss. 20 minutes later, Julia burst through the front door like she was leading a raid. Her makeup was perfect, her hair styled in that way that took an hour and cost a fortune to maintain. She wore the black dress I'd bought her for our anniversary, the anniversary she'd also nearly forgotten. We need to discuss your behavior lately, she announced, not even glancing at the birthday setup I'd arranged for myself. My behavior? I kept my voice level, but inside I was cataloging every detail. The way she avoided eye contact, the defensive posture, the immediate attack strategy, classic deflection tactics. You've been distant, cold, suspicious. It's affecting our marriage. I almost laughed. Here she was, still wearing the perfume I'd smelled on Alex's jacket the last time he'd stopped by the house, trying to gaslight me about being distant. You're right, I said, surprising her. I have been distant, but I think I know how to fix that. Her expression shifted, confusion replacing the prepared anger. What do you mean? I pulled out my phone and showed her the Instagram post I'd uploaded an hour ago. It was a photo of a gleaming silver Porsche Carrera, identical to Alex's, parked in what looked like our driveway. The caption read, "Birthday gift to myself. Life's too short for boring cars. Toy, 40 and thriving." Julia's eyes widened. You bought a Porsche? Without discussing it with me? I thought you might be too busy to discuss major purchases, I said, letting just enough edge creep into my voice. Besides, it's my birthday. I figured I deserved something special. For the first time in months, Julia looked at me with something resembling interest. Her whole demeanor changed, the anger melting into something that almost looked like admiration. Nick, that's incredible. Can I see it? It's parked out front. Want to take a look? She was already heading for the door, her heels clicking on the hardwood floor with excitement I hadn't heard in years. I followed her outside, my hands in my pockets, trying not to smile. The Porsche sat under the streetlight, looking exactly like the one from her Instagram photos. Julia walked around it slowly, running her fingers along the hood, peering through the windows. "It's beautiful," she breathed. "How much did it cost?" Let's just say it wasn't cheap. She turned to me, and for a moment, I saw something in her eyes that looked almost like the woman I'd married. Then her expression changed again, hardening into something I didn't recognize. "You know what?" she said, her voice rising. "This is typical. You buy yourself an expensive car without even mentioning it to me, but when I want to go out with friends, suddenly I'm the problem." "Julia, no, I'm tired of this. I'm tired of feeling guilty for having a social life, while you sit at home feeling sorry for yourself." She was working herself up into one of her dramatic episodes, the kind that usually ended with me apologizing for things I hadn't done. But tonight was different. Tonight, I just watched. "You want to know what I think about your precious car?" she continued, her voice getting shriller. "I think it's a pathetic midlife crisis purchase by a man who can't handle the fact that his wife has ambitions beyond this suburban prison." She grabbed her keys from her purse. Not house keys, I noticed, but something that looked suspiciously like car keys she shouldn't have had. "Julia, what are you doing?" But she was already at the Porsche, and before I could stop her, she dragged her key along the passenger side door, leaving a long, deep scratch in the silver paint. Then she did it again on the hood, and again on the driver's side. "There," she panted, her face flushed with exertion and anger. "How do you like your midlife crisis now?" A small crowd had gathered. Mrs. Patterson from next door stood on her porch in her bathrobe. The college kids from across the street had come out to see what the commotion was about. Someone was definitely filming with their phone. I looked at the keyed Porsche, then at Julia's triumphant expression, then back at the car, and I started laughing. "What's so funny?" Julia demanded. "That's not my car," I said, pulling out my phone to show her the photo again. If she'd looked closely, she would have noticed the background wasn't actually our driveway. It was Alex's. I'd taken the photo at his house 3 days ago when I'd stopped by to drop off some documents Julia had forgotten. Julia's face went white. "What do you mean it's not your car?" "I mean you just keyed Alex Vance's Porsche, the one he parked here an hour ago when he dropped you off from your girls' night out." I could see her mind racing, trying to process what I'd just said. The crowd was getting bigger, and at least 3 people were definitely recording. But the Instagram post was a photo I took of Alex's car. I never said I bought it. I just said it was a birthday gift to myself. And watching you destroy your lover's car definitely feels like a gift. Julia looked back at the keyed Porsche, then at the growing crowd of witnesses, then at me. "How did you know?" she whispered. "That you're sleeping with your boss?" "Julia, I debug complex systems for a living. You think I can't debug a cheating wife?" I turned and walked back toward the house, leaving her standing next to the destroyed Porsche with a dozen witnesses and at least one video that would probably be on social media within the hour. "Nick, wait," she called after me. "We can fix this. We can work this out." I paused at the front door and looked back at her. She looked small and desperate under the streetlight, nothing like the confident woman who'd been posing for Instagram photos an hour earlier. "You're right," I said. "We can work this out. But first, you might want to figure out how you're going to explain to Alex why his car looks like it went through a blender. And to the police, since Mrs. Patterson already called them." I went inside and locked the door behind me, finally allowing myself to smile. Happy birthday to me. The police report was filed by 2 a.m. By 8 a.m., Alex Vance was standing in my living room, and he looked like a man who'd aged 5 years overnight. "Your wife destroyed my car," he said without preamble. He was still handsome in that corporate executive way, but the perfect composure was cracked. His usually immaculate hair was disheveled, and there were stress lines around his eyes that hadn't been there the day before. "Ex-wife," I corrected, pouring myself coffee and not offering him any. "Julia filed for separation this morning, something about irreconcilable differences." "She can't just—" Alex started, then stopped himself. "Look, Nick, we need to discuss this situation like adults." "Adults," I repeated. "That's interesting coming from someone who's been screwing my wife for the past 6 months. Alex had the decency to look uncomfortable, but he recovered quickly. "Whatever personal issues Julie and I may have had, they don't justify property destruction. That car was worth $135,000. Was being the operative phrase. I'd estimate it's worth about half that now, assuming you can find someone willing to buy a keyed Porsche. I'd done my research. The scratches Julia had made weren't just surface damage. She'd gone deep, down to the metal in some places. A proper repair job would cost at least $20,000, assuming they could match the paint perfectly. I want her to pay for the damages, Alex said. Full restoration costs plus the depreciation in value. That's between you and her. Though I should mention that Julia is currently unemployed. Unemployed? Yeah, funny thing. Someone sent HR at Meridian Corp some interesting photos from last night's rooftop bar adventure. Apparently, the company has strict policies about executive relationships. Who knew? Alex's face went through several shades of red. You son of a witch. Now. Language. We're discussing this like adults, remember? The truth was, I hadn't sent the photos to HR. Julia's assistant, Jessica, had done that all on her own after finding some rather compromising emails on Julia's work computer. Jessica had never liked Julia. Something about Julia taking credit for Jessica's work and treating her like a personal servant rather than a professional colleague. But I wasn't about to tell Alex that. Let him think I was the mastermind behind his professional humiliation. What do you want? Alex asked through gritted teeth. Want? I don't want anything from you, Alex. You've already given me everything I needed, which is evidence, documentation, a clear pattern of behavior that's going to make the divorce proceedings very interesting. Alex's composure finally cracked completely. You think you're so smart, don't you? You think you've won something here? I think I've learned something valuable about the people I trusted, and I think I've decided to do something about it. Is that a threat? It's a promise. See, Alex, you made a mistake. You thought I was just some boring IT guy who'd roll over and take whatever you and Julia decided to dish out. But here's the thing about IT guys. We're really, really good at solving problems. My phone buzzed. A text from Greg, my best friend and former cop. Package delivered. She's not happy. I smiled. Speaking of problems, I think Julia's about to have a very interesting day. Alex looked like he wanted to hit me, but he was smart enough to know that assault charges wouldn't improve his situation. Instead, he straightened his tie and tried to reclaim some dignity. This isn't over, he said. You're absolutely right, it's not. After Alex left, I drove to the warehouse district where Greg ran his moving company. I found Julia in the loading dock, wearing jeans and a t-shirt instead of her usual designer outfits, looking like she wanted to homicide someone. This is insane, she said as soon as she saw me. You can't make me work here. I'm not making you do anything. But you did agree to my terms when you begged me to help with the Porsche situation. That had been a fun conversation. Julia had called me at 6 a.m, crying and desperate, begging me to help her figure out how to pay for the car repairs. I'd offered her a deal. I'd handle Alex and the legal issues, but she had to accept my conditions. I didn't know you meant literal manual labor, she protested. What did you think I meant? A nice office job where you could flirt with your next boss? Greg appeared from behind a stack of boxes, grinning. He was built like a linebacker and had the kind of face that made people think twice about causing trouble. She's a real piece of work, Nick. Spent the first hour complaining about the dress code. The dress code? Yeah, apparently steel-toed boots and work gloves don't go with her aesthetic. I looked at Julia, who was glaring at both of us with undisguised hatred. Her manicured nails were already chipped, and there was dust on her designer jeans. How long do I have to do this? She asked. Until you've worked off the debt for Alex's car repairs. At minimum wage, minus taxes and the cost of your work equipment, I'd estimate about 18 months. 18 months? Could be longer if you factor in the lawsuit Alex is probably going to file. And the divorce settlement, of course. Adultery doesn't play well in family court, especially when there's photographic evidence. Julia's face went white. What photographic evidence? I pulled out my phone and showed her a series of photos I'd taken over the past month. Julia and Alex at restaurants, holding hands in parking lots, kissing outside his apartment building. I'd become quite the surveillance expert. You were stalking me? I was documenting suspicious behavior. There's a difference, legally speaking. Greg whistled low. Wow, Nick. You really went full private investigator on this. I prefer to think of it as thorough documentation. Julia always said I was too detail-oriented. I want a lawyer, Julia said. Good luck affording one. But if you do find legal representation, make sure they explain how adultery affects asset division in the state. Spoiler alert, it's not in your favor. Julia looked like she was about to cry, but I'd seen her fake tears too many times to be moved by them. Instead, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months. Satisfaction. Greg, make sure she understands the safety procedures. We wouldn't want any workplace accidents. You got it, boss. I started to leave, then turned back. Oh, and Julia, your friends Heather and Tessa stopped by the house this morning. They wanted to return some things you'd left at Heather's place. What things? Clothes, mostly, and a pregnancy test. Julia's face went from white to green. Nick, I can explain. I'm sure you can, but save it for someone who cares. I left her standing in the warehouse, surrounded by boxes and the smell of industrial cleaning supplies, looking nothing like the polished executive she'd been 24 hours earlier. Phase 1 of my plan was complete. Julia was isolated, unemployed, and facing serious financial consequences for her actions. Alex was professionally humiliated and legally vulnerable. But I was just getting started. The pregnancy test changed everything, but not in the way Julia expected. I'd found it in the bag of belongings Heather had returned. A digital test showing positive results dated 3 weeks ago. For about 5 minutes, I'd felt that familiar gut punch of betrayal. Then my analytical mind kicked in, and I started doing math. 3 weeks ago, Julie and I hadn't been physically close in over 2 months. She'd been too stressed and too tired, and a dozen other excuses that made perfect sense now. So either this was the most immaculately conceived child in history, or Julia was pregnant with someone else's baby. I was betting on option 2. My phone rang. Julia's number. We need to talk, she said without preamble. Her voice sounded different, smaller, more vulnerable than I'd heard it in years. I'm listening. Not over the phone. Can you meet me at Riverside Park? By the old pavilion? When? Now, please, Nick, this is important. I found her sitting on a bench overlooking the river, still wearing her warehouse work clothes. She'd been crying, real tears this time, not the strategic ones she used to manipulate situations. I'm pregnant, she said as soon as I sat down. I know, Heather returned your test. Julia flinched. I was going to tell you myself. When? After you figured out how to make it work in your favor? It's not like that. Then what is it like, Julia? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you got knocked up by your boss, destroyed his car in a jealous rage, lost your job, and now you're trying to figure out how to pin the whole mess on me. She was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the water. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. It's Alex's baby. I figured. But he doesn't want anything to do with it. Or me. He says I'm a liability to his career. I almost felt sorry for her, almost. So what do you want from me? I want to come home. I want us to try again. I'll break things off with Alex completely. I'll be the wife you deserve, and we can raise this baby together. The audacity of it was breathtaking. She'd cheated on me, humiliated me, destroyed another man's property, and now she wanted me to play daddy to her lover's child. That's not going to happen, I said. Why not? You always said you wanted kids. I wanted kids with my wife, not with the woman who's been lying to me for months. Julia's composure cracked. Please, Nick. I made mistakes, but we can fix this. I love you. You love the idea of me cleaning up your mess. There's a difference. That's not fair. Fair? I stood up, anger finally breaking through my careful control. You want to talk about fair? Fair would have been you remembering my birthday. Fair would have been you ending our marriage before you started screwing your boss. Fair would have been you not trying to gaslight me into thinking I was the problem. I never meant for it to happen with Alex. It just did. Right, you just accidentally fell into bed with him. Multiple times. For months. Julia stood up too, and for a moment I thought she might try to hit me. Instead, she surprised me by grabbing my hands. I know I screwed up. I know I hurt you. But I'm desperate here, Nick. I don't have anywhere else to go. What about your sister Rachel? Your parents? Rachel won't return my calls. My parents, they found out about the affair. They're disappointed. Disappointed? That's one way to put it. I'll do anything to make this right. Anything. I looked at her for a long moment, studying her face. She was still beautiful, even with red-rimmed eyes and no makeup. But I couldn't see the woman I'd fallen in love with anymore. All I saw was someone who'd made a series of selfish choices and was now facing the consequences. There is one thing you can do, I said finally. Hope flickered in her eyes. What? Stay away from me. Don't call, don't text, don't show up at my house or my office. Don't involve me in whatever drama you create next. Nick, I'm serious, Julia. I'm done. We're done. You made your choice when you decided Alex was more interesting than your husband. Now live with it. I started to walk away, then turned back. Oh, and Julia, you might want to get a paternity test, just to be sure. What's that supposed to mean? It means Alex isn't the only married man you've been spending time with. Tessa mentioned something interesting about you and her husband, Brad. Apparently, it's been going on longer than your thing with Alex. Julia's face went white. That's not... We never... Save it. I really don't care anymore. I left her standing by the river, looking small and lost. But I didn't feel guilty. Julia had made her bed, several of them apparently, and now she could lie in it. My phone buzzed as I reached my car. A text from Greg. Phase 2 ready when you are. I smiled and typed back, let's do this. It was time to deal with Alex. Alex's office building was one of those glass and steel monuments to corporate success that was designed to intimidate visitors. The lobby had marble floors, abstract art that probably cost more than my car, and a security desk staffed by people who looked like they'd stepped out of a men's fashion magazine. I'm here to see Alex Vance, I told the receptionist, a young woman with perfect teeth and a smile that never reached her eyes. Do you have an appointment? Tell him Nick Foster is here about the Porsche situation. He'll want to see me. 5 minutes later, I was riding the elevator to the 20th floor, carrying a manila envelope that was going to change Alex's life in ways he couldn't imagine. Alex's office was exactly what I'd expected. Floor-to-ceiling windows, leather furniture, and a desk the size of a small aircraft carrier. He was standing with his back to me when I entered, looking out at the city like he owned it. I thought we'd finished our business, he said without turning around. We had, but then new information came to light. He turned to face me, and I could see the stress of the past week had taken its toll. His usually perfect appearance was slightly frayed around the edges. His tie was crooked, his shirt was wrinkled, and there were dark circles under his eyes. What kind of information? I placed the manila envelope on his desk. The kind that's going to make your divorce very expensive. Alex stared at the envelope like it might explode. What are you talking about? Open it. He did, and I watched his face go through several interesting color changes as he read the contents. DNA test results, medical records, and a series of photographs that told a very clear story. Where did you get this? He whispered. Julia's not the only woman you've been sleeping with, Alex. Did you really think your wife wouldn't eventually find out about the others? The envelope contained evidence of Alex's affairs with 3 different women over the past 2 years. Julia was just the latest in a pattern of behavior that went back to almost the beginning of his marriage. Natalie hired a private investigator 6 months ago, I continued. She's been building a case against you, documenting every affair, every lie, every dollar you've spent on your girlfriends. That's impossible. Natalie doesn't know. Natalie knows everything. The hotel receipts, the jewelry purchases, the apartment you rented for your extracurricular activities. She even knows about the baby. Alex sank into his chair like someone had cut his strings. What baby? Julia's baby. The one you've been pretending isn't yours. Turns out Natalie's investigator got DNA evidence from your coffee cup and compared it to samples from Julia's doctor's office. That was a lie, but Alex didn't know that. The truth was, I'd gotten the DNA evidence myself through less conventional means, and the baby wasn't Alex's. It was Brad's, Tessa's husband, and Julia's other affair partner. But Alex didn't need to know that yet. She can't use illegally obtained evidence, Alex said, but his voice lacked conviction. This isn't a criminal trial, Alex. It's a divorce proceeding. And in this state, adultery affects everything: asset division, alimony, custody of your legitimate children. Alex buried his face in his hands. What does she want? 75% of marital assets, full custody of the kids, and enough alimony to maintain her current lifestyle. Oh, and she wants you to acknowledge paternity of Julia's baby and pay child support. I can't afford that. It would bankrupt me. Should have thought of that before you decided to turn your marriage into a revolving door. Alex looked up at me, and for the first time since I'd known him, I saw real fear in his eyes. Why are you telling me this? What do you want? I want you to understand that actions have consequences. You thought you could take whatever you wanted, my wife, other men's wives, without paying a price. You were wrong. This is about Julia. This is about respect. You disrespected my marriage, my home, and me. You treated me like I was invisible, like I didn't matter. Well, guess what? I matter. And I'm very good at making problems for people who forget that. I stood up and headed for the door, then paused. Oh, one more thing. You might want to check your social media accounts. Seems like someone leaked some interesting photos from your various romantic adventures. Your board of directors is probably going to want to have a conversation with you about company image and moral clauses. Alex's face went from pale to gray. You bastard. Have a nice day, Alex. Give my regards to Natalie. I left him sitting in his expensive office, surrounded by the trappings of success that were about to be taken away from him piece by piece. The elevator ride down felt like a victory lap. My phone buzzed as I reached the lobby. A text from Julia. We need to talk. It's about the baby. I deleted the message without responding. Julia was about to learn that her problems were just beginning. The confrontation I'd been waiting for came 3 days later in the most public venue possible, the grand opening of the new Riverside Shopping Center, where half the town had gathered for the festivities. I was browsing the electronics store when I spotted Julia across the food court, arguing with someone on her phone. She looked terrible, exhausted, stressed, and wearing clothes that had seen better days. The polished executive persona was completely gone. She saw me at the same moment and ended her call abruptly. For a second, I thought she might try to avoid me, but then her jaw set in that familiar stubborn line, and she marched over. You son of a witch, she said loudly enough to turn heads. You destroyed my life. I didn't destroy anything, Julia. I just stopped protecting you from the consequences of your choices. Don't give me that philosophical BS. You orchestrated this whole thing. The job at the warehouse, Alex losing his position, Natalie's divorce. Natalie's divorce? I interrupted. Alex got fired? Julia's eyes narrowed. Don't pretend you don't know. Meridian Corp terminated him yesterday for violating the company's moral conduct policy. Something about inappropriate relationships with subordinates and misuse of company resources. I genuinely hadn't known about Alex getting fired, but I wasn't about to tell Julia that. Sounds like his chickens came home to roost. And what about my chickens, Nick? What about the fact that I'm pregnant and homeless and working for minimum wage in a warehouse I can't stand? The food court was getting quieter as more people tuned into our conversation. I could see phones coming out, people starting to record what was obviously going to be a spectacular public meltdown. You're homeless? I asked. My landlord evicted me. Apparently someone sent him photos of me keying the Porsche, along with information about my arrest record. You have an arrest record? Destruction of property, remember? The charges you said would be dropped? I had said that, but I'd been lying. Alex had pressed charges, and Julie had been arrested, fingerprinted, and released on her own recognizance. She was facing up to a year in jail and hefty fines. That's unfortunate, I said. Unfortunate? Julia's voice rose to a near shriek. You think this is unfortunate? I'm living in my car, Nick. I'm pregnant, broke, and sleeping in a Honda Civic because my husband decided to play God with my life. The crowd was definitely watching now. I could see people whispering, pointing, taking pictures. Someone had probably already posted this on social media. Ex-husband, I corrected. The divorce was finalized yesterday. Julia's face went white. What? You didn't show up to the hearing. Default judgment. I got the house, the cars, the savings accounts, and the business. You got your freedom and your debt. That's impossible. I would have been notified. You were, multiple times. But since you've been essentially homeless, the notices probably didn't reach you. That was only partially true. The notices had been sent to her last known address, which was our house. I'd received them and thrown them away. Legally questionable, but not technically illegal. Julia stared at me like she'd never seen me before. You planned this, all of it, from the beginning. I adapted to circumstances as they developed. The Porsche thing, you knew I'd key it. I hoped you would. You always were predictable when you were angry. The pregnancy. You know it's not Alex's baby. I know it's Brad's baby. The DNA test was very clear. Julia's legs seemed to give out. She grabbed onto a nearby table for support, and I could see the exact moment when she realized how thoroughly she'd been outplayed. Tessa doesn't know about you and Brad yet, I continued conversationally. But she will. I'm having lunch with her tomorrow. I thought she deserved to know why her marriage is falling apart. You can't. I can. I have photos, text messages, hotel receipts. Brad was even less careful than Alex. Julia looked around the food court, seeming to notice for the first time that we had an audience. Her face flushed with humiliation. Please, she whispered. I know I hurt you, but this is too much. I'm pregnant. I have nowhere to go. You should have thought of that before you decided to cheat on me with 2 different married men. It wasn't supposed to happen like this. How was it supposed to happen, Julia? You were going to keep lying indefinitely? String along 3 different men while you figured out which one could give you the best life? She didn't answer, but she didn't need to. We both knew that was exactly what she'd been doing. Here's what's going to happen, I said, pulling out my phone. I'm going to call Rachel and tell her where you are. She's been worried about you. Rachel won't talk to me. She will now. I had a long conversation with her yesterday. Explained how you'd been manipulating situations, lying to everyone, playing victim while you destroyed other people's lives. I dialed Rachel's number and handed Julia the phone. Tell her you need help. Tell her the truth for once in your life. Julia took the phone with shaking hands. I could hear Rachel's voice on the other end, and after a few minutes of quiet conversation, Julia started crying. Real tears. Not the strategic ones I'd become so familiar with. When she handed the phone back, she looked defeated. Rachel's coming to pick me up. Good. She's a decent person. She'll help you figure out how to be one too. Julia looked at me one last time, and I saw something in her eyes that might have been recognition. Not of me, but of what she'd become. I did love you, she said quietly. At the beginning. I know, I loved you too. But love isn't enough when it's not matched with respect and honesty. She nodded and walked away, leaving me standing in the food court, surrounded by curious strangers and the wreckage of what had once been my marriage. My phone buzzed, a text from Greg. Saw the video, you okay? I looked around at the crowd, many of whom were still filming, and realized that this conversation was probably already going viral. By tomorrow, everyone in town would know the whole sordid story. I typed back, never better. And for the first time in months, that was actually true. 6 months later, I was sitting in my lawyer's office, signing the last of the paperwork that would officially close the book on my marriage to Julia. The divorce had been final for months, but there had been loose ends to tie up. Property transfers, debt assignments, and the final settlement of Alex's lawsuit over the Porsche. That's the last of it, my lawyer Patricia Chen said as she notarized the final document. You're officially free and clear. What about Julia's situation? She pled guilty to destruction of property and got community service plus restitution payments. She's living with her sister and working at a call center. The baby was born healthy, a boy. Brad stepped up and acknowledged paternity after his wife threw him out. And Alex? Bankruptcy. His wife took him for everything in the divorce, and without his Meridian Corp salary, he couldn't keep up with the payments. Last I heard, he was working at a car dealership in the next county. I nodded. It was more or less what I'd expected. Actions had consequences, and both Julia and Alex were learning that lesson the hard way. Any regrets? Patricia asked. I thought about it for a moment. About the marriage ending? No. About the way it ended? Sometimes. You could have handled it differently. I could have, but they chose to lie, cheat, and disrespect me. I chose to respond strategically rather than emotionally. I'm comfortable with that choice. Patricia gathered up the papers and slid them into a folder. What's next for you? I'm thinking about expanding the business, maybe hiring some additional consultants. Greg's been after me to bring him on as a partner. Sounds like a good plan. I left the lawyer's office and drove to the cemetery where my parents were buried. It was something I'd started doing when I needed to think clearly, sitting by their graves and talking through whatever was on my mind. Well, I said, settling onto the bench near their headstones, and it's finally over. The October air was crisp, and the leaves were just starting to turn. It had been almost a year since Julia had forgotten my birthday. Almost a year since I'd discovered her affair and decided to do something about it. A lot had changed in that year. I'd lost a wife but gained self-respect. I'd lost some friends, the ones who'd sided with Julia or thought I'd been too harsh, but kept the ones who mattered. I'd lost the comfortable illusion of a happy marriage, but gained the uncomfortable truth about who I'd been married to. My phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. This is Julia. I know you probably don't want to hear from me, but I wanted to say I'm sorry for all of it. You didn't deserve what I put you through. I stared at the message for a long time, then typed back, I hope you're doing better. Take care of yourself and your son. She responded immediately. Thank you. That means more than you know. I deleted the conversation and put my phone away. Some chapters needed to stay closed. The sun was setting as I drove home to the house that was finally completely mine. I pulled into the driveway and sat for a moment, looking at the place where Julia had keyed Alex's Porsche almost a year ago. Mrs. Patterson had told me the story had become neighborhood legend. The night the quiet-a-tea guy outsmarted his cheating wife and her lover. I went inside and poured myself a beer, then walked out to the back deck. The yard needed work. The grass was getting long, and the flower beds Julia had maintained were overgrown with weeds. But it was peaceful in a way it hadn't been when she'd lived here. My phone rang. Greg's number. "Hey, partner," he said. "You ready to celebrate?" "Celebrate what?" "The end of your legal troubles and the beginning of our business partnership. I just signed the papers Patricia sent over." I smiled. Foster & Associates has a nice ring to it. I was thinking more like Foster and Kowalski Consulting. Sounds more official. "We'll work on the name. You want to come over? I've got beer and leftover pizza. On my way." I hung up and looked out at my yard, my house, my life. It wasn't the life I'd planned a year ago, but it was honest. It was real. It was mine. And for the first time in years, that felt like enough. The doorbell rang 20 minutes later. Greg stood on my front porch with a six-pack and a grin. "So," he said, settling into a chair on the deck, "any regrets about how this whole thing played out?" I thought about Julia, sleeping in her sister's spare room, raising another man's child while working at a call center. I thought about Alex, selling cars for commission after losing everything he'd built. I thought about the friends I'd lost, the gossip I'd endured, the year of my life I'd spent orchestrating revenge instead of moving forward. "No," I said finally, "no regrets. They made their choices and I made mine. Everyone got what they deserved." Greg raised his beer. "To getting what you deserve." I clinked my bottle against his. "To new beginnings." As the sun finished setting and the first stars appeared, I realized that my 40th birthday, the one Julia had forgotten, the one that had started this whole chain of events, had been the best gift I'd ever received. It had shown me who I really was and who I wanted to be. And that knowledge was worth more than any marriage built on lies.